The memory buried within things is sometimes greater than what we are able to recollect as the years pass. Memory dilutes, but the object remains unaltered. It allows one to study the history within it and for generations to live off that history and perhaps understand genealogy better. What one carried across the border, how many and what kind of objects they brought, how they were able to carry them across, what was valuable and what was mundane, was often determined by the kind of life one had, and provides incredible insight into the material culture of that time.
Hello and welcome to Harper Broadcast. I'm Amrita Tripathi in conversation today with Aanchal Malhotra with her book Remnants of a Separation. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks.
Okay, so I want to start by asking you a little bit about how you decided to start this book, because you sort of go through that in the introduction and the way you talk about first it was a thesis project, but you got so much information and very rich material to talk about. Just take us through how it started.
So I would say the project first began as a fine art project, and that too in 2013. I was doing my MFA thesis in Concordia University in Montreal, and I had taken a gap year because I had no ideas for my thesis. And so I came back to India and I was spending some time here, and just one day a friend, Mayank Sufi, he said to me that I'm doing this story on old houses in the city, and your mother's ancestral house in Roopnagar is pretty old. It's a very Haveli type house falling apart in places. And he says, can we go interview the people that live there and look at the house? I said, yeah. So we go there and he's talking to my grandfather and my grandfather's eldest brother about the house, the residents, how the population changed post-partition. And then my grandfather's eldest brother leaves the room and he comes back with an array of old objects, and he says that if you have to talk about history, then you must talk about it in its entirety. And the house is old, the people living here, yes, they are of course old, but these objects are older than both those things. And he started talking about these two objects, which is a ghada, like a medium-sized vessel, and a gulls, which is a yardstick, that his family had gotten from Lahore a few years before partition. And when he was talking about those things, when he was touching the gulls, when he was showing me how lassi is made in the ghada, he was virtually transported back to a place where he could see those objects being used in everyday life. My mother made lassi like this is what she used to put in it. It was such a kind of visceral, time had shifted for him. I had never seen that happen because of an object. And after we left that day and Mayank had filed his story, I kept thinking about this effect that old objects have on us, and then I started thinking about, if one man can be so connected to an object from the past, what about other people? What did refugees bring with them when they came? What could they bring with them? And what are the relationships of those objects with those people today? And from there I started at home with my grandfather's brother, with my maternal grandparents, paternal grandparents, and then it became a little larger. I started talking to strangers about objects. And then it transformed from just an MFA thesis into a much larger project, and now a literary rendition of the project because of the nature of material that came my way.
Yeah. And also because you're tying into a very difficult, evocative, moving part of the subcontinent's history, right? You're talking about also partition, many things come in through these stories that you're telling us. It must have been quite powerful to witness or have people unlock their memories talking to you through these tangible objects.
It was a difficult process because I think material anthropology is something that's not vastly explored in terms of partition history. Actually, I don't think there is any other project that's looking at it in such great detail as this is. But to be honest, I think at the beginning people found it very funny and very strange that this young girl, I was 23 at the time, why is this young girl A, interested in partition because it's so far removed from her, B, interested in things like old books, utensils, my pens, my shawls, and not really asking the questions about my experience, my journey, which of course are difficult questions to ask from the onset. But what is important to acknowledge in this project is that I wanted the object not to be something that's sitting in the background, but around something which the entire background is arranged. Like the object was the prime focus of our conversation, and I think for people that was a very strange way of approaching history.
at some level, through this book, you're the collector of these memories, because at some point you also decided you're not going to be just talking about your family. How did that sort of thought process, because it would have been one thing to say, I want to collect and, be the keeper of my family's memories through 3 generations. You've gone much beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
How did that sort of happen for you?
It was very organic and very natural. It is, I think, an unfair depiction of history if you only talk about your family, because it's always the case that strangers are more open with strangers, and family members are always a little more apprehensive sharing things about history with their subsequent generations. I think it just happened very naturally. I was curious. और लोग क्या लाए थे, क्या लाए थे? And of course it started with familiar people like friends of the family, and then it became absolutely about strangers. Somebody would write to me being like, I have this friend who has this friend who has this nani who has this old ghada, you want to go see it? And I'm like, yeah, of course I want to go see it.
You decided you wanted to go to Pakistan and do a little bit of that there as well.
Yeah. So in 2014, I said, Acha chalo, Delhi mein I've done so much, I'm ready for my thesis. But when I started reviewing the material I collected in Delhi, I found it to be very one-sided. And of course it would be one-sided because it's only about people that came on this side, right? It's not about the people that went from here. And so I thought that to have a holistic picture, I need to record stories of people that went to what became Pakistan, people that went to what became Bangladesh later. And so I broadened my research horizons, and I did go to Pakistan. I didn't have the fortune of going to Bangladesh, but I interviewed some families who had come from there. Going to Pakistan was wonderful. I don't know what I imagined it to be otherwise, if not exactly like Delhi. Lahore is a city which is constructed exactly like Delhi. The streets are similar, the people look the same, the language is the same. So I think it was a very enriching experience and very beneficial to the project. In Lahore, I worked with an organization called the Citizens Archive of Pakistan, whose work is essentially to record and restore history of Pakistani citizens. And they helped me reach out to people that had objects. And I think that because so much time had passed since the inception of the research, I was a much better researcher. And the kind of questions that I asked were better, and also the responses I received were so varied that I knew exactly what question would lead to what. I think it was a very important and enriching part of the project.
Rudrangshu Mukherjee, among all of the sort of rave reviews you've been getting, including from historians, does call this an unusual book that he recommends for its extraordinariness, and says objects help to redeem time. That's a beautiful line. Is that something you felt as well?
I think that I have found incredible solace in objects. I have become very familiar with the landscape of things. It's weird because I am an artist to begin with, and then I became a writer. But because of this book, I have become somebody that collects things. So from someone that makes things, I've become someone that collects things, and that is a terrain that I've become really familiar with. I think objects provide incredible solace to people.